You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, it's Kat Shamapande. Thanks for joining us for Let's Get Surety today. Today's podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit about rural broadband and legislative language that NASBP and NSPS have been pursuing around that and kind of where rural broadband is heading. So today I have my co-host, Mark McCallum, CEO of NASBP. Hey, Mark.
Hey, I can't wait to continue our discussion with JB and Larry.
Yeah, it's great to have these guys back. So we've got Larry Leclerc. He's the director of GR at NASBP. Hey, Larry.
Good morning, Kat. Good morning, Matt.
And we've got JB Bird, and he's representing the National Society of Professional Surveyors. Hey, JB.
Hey, good morning, Kat. Good morning, Mark. Thanks again for hosting.
Good morning.
So I know, JB, on our last podcast, you kind of told us a little bit about NSPS, but I think it's good to go back there and do that again. Do you mind just giving us a little information on yourself and NSPS?
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Kat. So I'm John Bird. I go by JB. Excuse me. The office where I'm based in is Fairfax, Virginia, and work for a consulting firm known as Miller Winhold Capital Strategies and John Pelletiello Associates. John is my boss. That's why I do not use John as my name. I go with JB. Keep my initials. And the NSPS is the National Society of Professional Surveyors. And our members are organized by state society. And at the national level, NSPS represents all the state societies of land surveyors, also aerial surveyors, folks that are doing surveying and mapping and geospatial data collection from a wide variety of platforms. They could be airborne, they could be terrestrial, any which way you can collect surveying and mapping data.
So on our last podcast, JB and Larry gave us a lot of background information on how NSPS and NASBP kind of came together to pursue this broadband legislation and what the issues were for each association. Today, we're really going to be looking at some of the draft legislation or language. Larry, do you want to talk a little bit about NASBP's language and what we're looking to address?
Yeah, thank you, Kat. I appreciate that. Yeah, what JB and I got together back in I guess it was late winter, first part of spring. We were looking, JB was looking for language potentially to expand the rural broadband mapping, and NASBP was looking to include payment and performance bond on rural broadband construction projects. At the beginning, the FCC, of course, was only requiring for their security a letter of credit, which is an inhibitant for small ISP providers. Of course, a letter of credit is 100% collateralized. It hurts the balance sheets of a small ISP. So a bond certainly would be an alternative product for those ISPs to get involved in the market space. So what we've done is essentially we've put together legislative language which amends the Telecommunications Act that says essentially for grant opportunities that are provided to rural broadband projects, simply a performance bond should be in place to protect the federal government's interests, and a payment bond should be in place to protect subcontractors and suppliers. Simple as that. And we've been shopping this language along with JB's amended language to the Rural Broadband Data Act since, I would say, mid to late March. We've identified some potential legislative vehicles that have been introduced to expand the Rural Broadband Data Act in both the House and the Senate. So we continue to reach out to those offices that we've met with and expand our portfolio to other offices that we have not had an opportunity to speak with so far.
Hey, Larry. So in terms of allowing bonds to be a preferred security, that would simply be an alternative to a letter of credit. It wouldn't be necessarily always in place of. Would it be at the option of the rural broadband provider?
That's correct. And what we've heard is, the larger ISPs, the the letter of credit requirement is not a detriment to those bigger companies. But what we've heard, not only from ISP trade associations, there was actually a letter that was sent to the FCC earlier this year from 7 U.S. senators asking for a potential alternative to the letter of credit, because those senators have been hearing from their constituents as well. The FCC should be looking at another form. If they want to keep the letter of credit requirement, that's fine. But how about another form of security that would help those or benefit those small ISPs attempting to bid on these rural broadband projects?
So if I'm understanding this correctly, part of the ask is to permit a surety bond as an alternative security to a letter of credit. And that might be to guarantee the obligation that the rural broadband provider has as a recipient of federal grants or funds. And then again, you're also educating that surety bonds in the form of performance and payment bonds would be beneficial on the construction portion as well.
That's right. We're talking about the construction portion of the build out for these rural broadband projects. So the grant recipient would furnish a performance bond and a payment bond to protect subs and suppliers and to protect the federal government interests. Correct.
Okay, great. So I imagine you've been looking for vehicles for that language. What type of vehicles have you been looking for, and what kind of success are you having? And then I imagine you're trying to kind of integrate both the issues of the surveyors and the producers in this effort. Larry, why don't you go ahead and start off, and then I'd like to hear from JB.
Okay, thanks, Mark. There have been a number of COVID stimulus relief bills that are on the Hill right now circulating. But one bill in particular that I'll reference is the HEROES Act, which passed the House, provides funding, of course, for unemployment benefits, expands unemployment benefits, expands opportunities for infrastructure build out, also provides benefits for states and localities, and potentially educational purposes as well. There was a provision in the HEROES Act which addressed rural broadband infrastructure, and we're attempting to potentially get language in the HEROES Act that addressed not only the mapping piece, but also expands upon the security piece to include payment and performance bonds, similar to the language that we've drafted and we are furnishing and shopping on the Hill. So we've got the HEROES Act that have passed the House, and we're also looking at other potential COVID stimulus bills that have been circulating in the House and the Senate.
Wow.
That's right, Larry and Mark. So I think where we are right now with the legislation is, as Larry mentioned, there is some helpful language, at least addressing the issue in the House bill, the HEROES Act. What's been introduced in the Senate, unfortunately, there's really not much there at this point on broadband infrastructure deployment. Because the House and Senate are negotiating, hopefully there's an opportunity to still take an opportunity and add some language through some offices we've been working with. So that those are efforts underway. And just as NASBP has a major pitch in our draft legislation, what we're trying to pursue on the surveying and mapping side of things is to allow the FCC to actually, if they're going to start from scratch on a 2.0 version of the map, what we want to make sure is they leverage the best available technology mapping-wise to start with what we call a base level map. And the technology that we're talking about here, you may be aware of it. It's called LIDAR, Light Detection and Ranging, LIDAR. And the simple way to think about it, It's laser mapping. And the nationwide LiDAR program is operated and managed by the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, in the Department of the Interior. They have a program known as the 3D Elevation Program, 3DEP or 3DEP. And so that's where the surveyors work very closely with USGS. The goal is two-sided with 3DEP. Number one, let's provide the FCC an accurate base level map so they can actually see a national terrain model. They can see the topographic layout of the land, so to speak. And on the second hand, on the second layer of potentially where this could help the ISP and telecom community, and at the same time the infrastructure community as far as deployment options, is if you have a national terrain model using this LiDAR technology, then you can work with the state and local folks on the ground for siting and permitting of the actual infrastructure. So if you're going to put a telecom tower, or if you're going to dig and put conduit or fiber cable underground, all that requires elevation data to figure out, where there are obstacles to signal strength, where the signal strength is going to be muted, and then you can then position using the siting and permitting data available through the mapping and surveying data from 3DEP and LiDAR. So that's in a nutshell what we're trying to do. We're also trying to make sure that the work is done by professionals, just like in the surety bond profession and industry. You have professionals doing this work. We want to make sure that the surveying community is well brought into this effort. And so we have some language in here that addresses professionalism in the mapping, which is something that wasn't really looked out for back in 2008 during the original stimulus bill. So those are, I think, the major areas that NSPS is looking to engage and to have the legislation address.
If you are not able to find a home for the language, Larry and JB, have you considered a standalone bill?
Yes, we've looked at other potential ways to accomplish our goal here is by looking at other offices that have an interest in the rural broadband space. So we've approached not only potential amendments to either the HEROES Act or other potential COVID relief stimulus bills, but we've also asked these offices that we're meeting with, are they perhaps willing to introduce a standalone? So we've kind of approached it in a couple of different ways, either as an amendment to a vehicle and or as a standalone bill.
And the interesting thing here, Mark, is I think just like every single trade association or professional society, that when they took a look at the calendar year of 2020 and which day and which week was going to be the respective Day on the Hill visits or their members of Congress visits, right. Almost every single organization either had to postpone or cancel their Day on the Hill efforts.
Yeah.
And so that's normally when we could leverage our members coming in and making these asks in person. And that's why I think we're the beauty of what Larry and I have been able to do as far as all these calls. We've been able to kind of in lieu of our members not being able to come in and chat in person with staff or members of Congress, our outreach has at least put this back on the radar screen. I think our efforts on the NSPS angle was we had an issue paper all ready to go. We had draft legislative language ready to go. But then with the pandemic, unfortunately, and COVID, we just couldn't mobilize our membership the typical ways that we're used to.
Wow. So that's kind of a handicap maybe for this Congress, wouldn't you say? If you were, speaking of handicap, if you were handicapping your chance of success in this Congress, JB, what would you, what kind of odds would you give it?
Wow. I'd probably be in a different profession if I could call the odds on this. Very few bills actually get enacted into law. So I think what we're trying to do is with a standalone bill, the goal would be a couple of things. Number one, the most direct route is just to have it move through a committee of jurisdiction and get enacted into law. Well, that's at this point in where we are in the Congress, probably little odds to that happening. So I think what we're trying to do is to leverage our language into a standalone bill or turn that standalone bill language into an amendment that can be added to a must-pass bill, such as, it may be at this point too late for like a defense bill, or but the big one that Larry's already covered is the actual phase 4 infrastructure COVID recovery efforts, whether it's the HEROES Act or the HEALS Act, which was recently introduced on the Senate side. So I think as those two bills are negotiated between the Senate and the House, that's the opportunity at this point. Now, what are the odds of having our language added at this point? You'd probably have to say less than 50%, but the important thing is that I think we've done so much outreach and we've really micro-targeted to key offices and also leadership as well. So that's, I think at this point where we are in the Congress, I wouldn't want to be too negative or too pessimistic to say that we don't have a chance whatsoever. Just the opposite. I'm actually slightly encouraged that perhaps unfortunately, the longer the negotiations take, that's the opportunity where they'll have more conversations potentially to include and come to an agreement on rural broadband infrastructure deployment. And that would be the pathway for our language, I believe.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Not to, you earlier had indicated the difficulty that COVID has placed on your advocacy efforts by not having members come in and then make their pitch in person. But I imagine, as you guys have kind of alluded, as COVID continues and people are not able to physically go to school and they need those internet connections, that maybe that magnifies your touches that you're doing. What do you think about that, Larry?
Well, I would totally agree with that, Mark. I mean, the one thing that I continue to hear on Capitol Hill is the need for the further development of rural broadband. That seems to be the one consensus item that lawmakers can agree upon. I mean, in this day and age, when there seems to be real no agreement on any particular issues on Capitol Hill, and JB and I have heard this time and time again, rural broadband seems to unite the parties. And all the members agree that certainly in this day and age, with what the country is faced with over the past 5 or 6 months or so now going on, the further development for rural broadband to help educators where kids are actually learning remotely now. Kids are, having to deal with whether it be education or the parents are dealing with long-term stay-at-home orders, or perhaps now we're talking about healthcare related issues. Right. That seems to unite the parties. With the need for access to rural broadband couldn't be more important, and that's. We certainly hear that, and perhaps that will bode for our success as well. I mean, as JB said, we've reached out to a number of offices, and I've counted over 50 so far that we've met with since the end of February. They certainly understand our issue. I think we've made a great outreach to these offices, and I think that they certainly understand the need to expand the mapping and to protect the federal government and the subcontractors and suppliers that rely on the bond product. So to me, there's good opportunity here, certainly to expand the rural broadband space, and we'll just have to see what happens in the next relief package.
Wow.
Yeah, and Mark, just real quick, just to piggyback on Larry's comments there. So I think going back even before 2008 in the stimulus bill, where the broadband map program came into being, there's always been a push to close the so-called digital divide. And that has lingered. and lingered. And now with the COVID and the pandemic, I think the digital divide has been even worsely exposed. It's been exacerbated, and I think that's where Larry is unbelievably on the ball and connecting the dots between members of Congress and what we're trying to do to try to close that gap and close that digital divide. So I think that's where the synergy is between what we're doing and then the messaging on this for over a decade. It just the status quo hasn't worked, and that's why the reform language that we've come up with jointly, I think, is the way to go. The question is, as this Congress comes to the second half of the year and comes to a close, will they actually take act? Will they act on our suggested language?
Well, we can't thank you enough, Larry and JB, for your efforts on this a true bipartisan issue that needs to be addressed. And, on behalf of producers and surveyors, you guys have really done an incredible job. So thank you.
Yeah. And JB, can you tell us if anyone wants more information on NSPS, where they should look, or NSPS's GR?
Yes. So the NSPS website is nsps.us.com. And if you go to the main website, there's an advocacy button in the middle, fourth from the left. And you can scroll down and take a look at the government affairs and some of the issues that are covered. So that's a good resource for folks looking for more information on issues of importance to the surveying profession.
Awesome. And Larry, if they would like the same kind of government relations information from NASBP, where's the best place to look?
Well, certainly contact me. No, I'm just kidding. But besides reaching out to me directly, certainly go to our website. Under the advocacy page, there's a whole host of information that a user can find, along with maps that provide information dealing with statutes on the state Little Miller Acts, comment letters that NASBP has sent on behalf of its members to various state agencies, our government relations approved agenda for 2020. So there's all kinds of information that certainly a user could find under the advocacy tab on our homepage.
Larry and JB, it was great having you as guests again. We'll have to bring you back when you can give us some updates on what happened with legislation that's out there now.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Mark. We'd be glad to.
Happy to. Thank you for this opportunity. It's been great working with Larry. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.